isolationist message. But putting America last, that certainly is. Just look at us now, abandoning our own citizens, abandoning our own allies. This is what putting America last looks like. And that's why we have to get America back to America first. And so help us God, we will. And that is a real story. Joining us now with his reaction, former Reagan White House political director, conservative columnist, and author of the book Swamp Wars, Jeffrey Lord. Jeffrey, you wrote a powerful op-ed this week. We're going to put it up on the screen right now. You say that President Trump is the new Churchill. And you write, no one has been more prescient about what a Biden presidency would mean for America than Donald Trump. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. Winston Churchill is one of my favorite figures from history. I have read tons and tons and tons of books about him and by him. And in the 1930s, he was a member of parliament, but in the British system, he was sort of sent back to the back benches, where he kept warning two back-to-back prime ministers of his own party, Stanley Baldwin and Neville Chamberlain, that Germany was rearming militarily. The British needed to do the same. Baldwin totally ignored him. Chamberlain thought he was so smart, he made himself his own foreign minister and said, and was told by his own brother, I found this amusing, who had been a previous foreign minister, Neville, you're not as smart as you think you are on foreign affairs. But he was very arrogant. And of course, we know what happened from it. This is Joe Biden writ large. And I can tell you something else. I took a look back at 1975 and that pullout from Saigon and the disaster from the American embassy. And lo and behold, in his memoirs, President Gerald Ford, who was president at the time, specifically mentions a meeting with then Senator Joe Biden, in which he came to the White House with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and they told President Ford they were going to cut the funding to the Vietnamese. And President Ford said that they were, quote unquote, short-sighted and that this was, quote unquote, cut and run. And Biden was unrepentant. Here we are all these years later. Nothing has changed with Joe Biden. Nothing is learned. This is the same sort of disaster, and it's not good.
It's so sad when you see the same failures running the military right now. These are the people that got us into the endless wars. Of course, they would have no idea how to get us out of them.
Right. You know, what I liked about President Trump, like Winston Churchill, he wasn't going to fool around with the bad guys, as it were. And he had this phone call with the head of the Taliban where, in essence, he said to him, if you harm the hair on one American, we're coming to your village. And he named the village and said, we know where you are. We know where to find you, and we will come for you. Nothing happened to Americans in Afghanistan because of that. This is, you know, what gets me, Natalie, is this is the age-old wisdom of George Washington, the Roman Empire. President Reagan called it peace through strength. When you are strong and you make it abundantly clear that you will use that strength if they don't do what they're supposed to do, then, you know, you're not going to get anywhere if you don't do that. And as you know, I worked for President Reagan. He was magnificent about this. And he put missiles in Europe. There were millions of leftist protesters in the streets around the world, and Reagan stuck to his guns on it. And finally, of course, he got Gorbachev to the table, and eventually the Soviet Union collapsed. You've got to have a spine of steel here, and that is not Joe Biden's strength.
You're so right. And the fact that when you look at the world, they were laughing at him even back at these meetings when he was telling them America is back. And they go, oh, yeah, America is back. But they were laughing at us. Now we see what weakness looks like on the world stage. We now have war. We have the British Parliament actually censuring us. America really is. Are we ever going to be able to get back that status? Or do you think it is irreparable what Biden's doing?
Well, it's very damaging. And, you know, sadly, we have to realize this is only August of his first year. We've got, you know, a very long time to go in the remainder of his term. Things can, and I have a feeling will, get worse.
You're right, because there's no indication it's going to get better. When you look at everything, he's not taking advice from anyone that would actually do things. They're just making excuses. They don't really know what's going on. When you watch the media, no one really knows media better than you. How do you think them covering it, especially CNN? Of course, they'll throw some things like it's Biden's fault, but they are trying to link President Trump into this, even though Biden did the exact opposite of his plan.
Exactly. Well, they're not fans of Donald Trump. That particularly at CNN,
Right.
I can personally assure you on that one. Um, but I have been a little surprised that there has been more criticism of President Biden across the media spectrum, which is highly unusual. But in its own way, that tells you how big of a disaster this has been. I mean, when these networks are putting up the visual images of thousands of people on a runway trying to climb onto an American cargo jet to get out of there, that message is there. It's indelible. And so I think they're hedging their bets a little bit. This is a huge disaster, and this is going to have an effect on America, on the world, and hopefully in 2024, the election.
Exactly. Well, that article you wrote again, President Trump, he warned this was going to happen. Of course, we had no idea it would get this bad and what they would do on November 3rd in order to achieve this. But he is Churchill. He is still Churchill in terms of how he's addressing this, and the people are with him. We need a leader like Churchill to get us out of this situation and save America. So God bless you, Jeffrey. Thank you for what you're doing out there to expose the swamp. The swamp is back, and look at what they're doing to our country. It's so sad to see. God bless you.
You bet, Natalie. Absolutely.
We'll see you soon. And coming up next on The Real Story, the effort to impeach Joe Biden. Congresswoman Marjorie
Appalled at what I heard from Secretary Blinken, General Lloyd Austin, General Milley, who don't even say the same things and are saying different things from the administration, from Joe Biden, and who's silent, Kamala Harris. I really wish that we had that type of America first, no man left behind leadership in this crisis that Joe Biden has created as commander-in-chief. He's no commander-in-chief. That is why I've introduced articles of impeachment on Joe Biden for dereliction of duty.
Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene moves to impeach Joe Biden over his gross mismanagement of the crisis in Afghanistan. Congresswoman Greene says Biden is responsible for weakening America in the eyes of the world, and that his actions are so egregious that he must be held accountable. The 3 impeachment resolutions introduced in the House of Representatives are centered on Biden's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, as well as his failure to control illegal immigration through the U.S.-Mexico border, and the unclear constitutionality of Biden's new eviction moratorium. Meantime, the crisis in Afghanistan is still spiraling out of control. Thousands of United States citizens are still trapped in the war-torn country, as Biden remains steadfast in his deadline for the withdrawal of American troops.
We agreed that we will continue to our close cooperation to get people out as efficiently and safely as possible. We are currently on a pace to finish by August the 31st. The sooner we can finish, the better. Each day of operations brings added risk to our troops. But the completion by August 31st depends upon the Taliban continuing to cooperate and allow access to the airport for those who we're transporting out, and no disruptions to our operations.
So essentially, Biden is negotiating with terrorists over the safety and security of American citizens. Taliban leaders are calling the shots, threatening to retaliate if Team Biden misses the deadline. Those left behind will no doubt face the wrath of these marauders. And given Biden's track record over his brief tenure, there's definitely reason to be concerned. This image perfectly sums up Biden's feckless leadership. The so-called commander-in-chief sitting alone in a conference room at Camp David, watching Kabul fall to the Taliban while on vacation at the Maryland retreat. With an absent look on his face, Biden stared at an array of video screens, viewing the crisis he created as a distant, hands-off observer. All the more reason to move forward with removing this ineffective leader from office. Joining me now, Representative for Georgia's 14th Congressional District, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Congresswoman, there are so many different reasons we could impeach Biden. First of all, for stealing the November 3rd election. What made you decide these 3 specific charges and grounds? Because he's destroying America and the world.
Absolutely. You're 100% right. I really appreciate this lead in because you described it all perfectly. And this is the pain that Americans are feeling today. We are outraged, angered, appalled, disgusted, and embarrassed that our president has done this to our country and to our American military. I've actually introduced 4 articles of impeachment. The first one was on January 20th, the same day he was inaugurated. And that's because we already know that this man is corrupt. The proof of him being corrupt is on Hunter Biden's laptop, and his own words talking about a phone call that he made where he was willing to withhold American tax dollars just to punish a certain attorney that was going after his son. So we know exactly who Joe Biden is, but we never thought that it would be this awful. Our American troops have been dishonored by the supposed commander-in-chief of the United States military. American citizens have been abandoned, are now in the worst hostage crisis in United States history. And now, even worse, we have no hope of getting all of them out. You know, the August 31st deadline is the deadline for the American military to leave. But August 28th will be the last day that planes will be evacuating American citizens and Afghan allies. This failure is because of Joe Biden. There was no proper planning. As a matter of fact, he threw away President Trump's great plan that he had laid out to safely remove Americans, to safely vet American or Afghan allies, and safely remove our American military. Joe Biden, through his Trump derangement syndrome, and he's mentally incapable of leading our country, has completely ruined any hope of getting all Americans out. And bending over to the Taliban, allowing America to be threatened by these terrorists is too much to bear. I think everyone is outraged, and that's why I introduced articles of impeachment, not only just for his dereliction of duty, with as far as Afghanistan goes, right, but on every single level that he's done wrong as a president.
It's so sad to see. And Republicans right now, I don't get it. Democrats were such an effective resistance when they were in the minority. Of course, they had the media behind them, but Republicans have the people behind them if they would stand with President Trump. What has been reaction for you moving forward on this impeachment? Because impeachment was a chant with the Democrats for 4 years. Why are you really the only person there talking about it when there's so much corruption?
Well, actually, there's many of my colleagues talking about it, but I only have two co-sponsors, Mary Miller and Paul Gosar. So there's a big difference in saying things on TV interviews and saying what you think should be done, and then actually putting your name down to pursue action. See, as I was telling my colleagues over these past few days, the Democrats were able to impeach President Trump for a phone call, and then they impeached him a second time simply for a 3-hour riot at the Capitol that he had nothing to do with. Even Bill Clinton was impeached for lying about sex. If Joe Biden is not impeachable for this horrible offense that he has committed against our country, then when will Republicans ever step up to the plate and impeach this man and hold these people accountable for what they're doing to our country, what they're doing to our military, what they're doing to American citizens, and what they're doing to our allies all over the world? So I'm asking my Republican colleagues continually, please, let's move forward. We need a plan in place, because every single Republican and even Democrats across the country are on board with impeachment. We just need Republicans in Congress to move on it.
Do you think there would be any Democrats that would defect at this point? Because, of course, there was the one New Jersey Democrat who actually changed parties for President Trump when he saw the corruption on the Democrat side. Do you think there's any Democrats, moderate, real moderates, not ones that just pen op-eds and then just go ahead and vote with Nancy Pelosi? Do you think there's any that actually fear getting voted out, or do they think it's rigged and they're just fine doing whatever Pelosi wants to do?
Well, I think they are learning that this Afghanistan crisis, this Afghanistan failure is not going away. As a matter of fact, many of them will lose their elections just because of what Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and all the people in charge did to Americans and our American military in Afghanistan. So I believe if we build a strong enough case and present the evidence, that we could possibly see some Democrats make the right decision and vote for impeachment. Because if they stand and defend Joe Biden against true evidence of what he's done, which we're all watching unfold, no one is in disagreement about this. Even right. CNN is saying that he did everything wrong. Then they'll have to pay the price. If they choose to stand and defend Joe Biden, they'll pay the price. And I think we should make them own up to it, put them on record, and that's how we move forward.
Do you think Republican House leadership will get behind you in this effort? Because We're all just watching the world being destroyed right now, and we're tired of seeing people on TV. We want to see action like you're doing.
I totally agree with you. I believe actions is the best way to prove to the American people and prove to Republican voters who we are. I was encouraged by hearing a lot of my colleagues talking about impeachment Monday and Tuesday when we were in Washington, D.C., because Nancy Pelosi brought us there for the horrible communist agenda with the budget and the infrastructure deal and the federal elections bill to take over elections to cause more stolen elections. I was encouraged, and I'm hoping to see a case be built, and I will continue to keep calling on them to do it.
Good. Well, keep us posted, Congresswoman. Again, thank you for your courage out there. Sometimes it has to feel like you're a lone warrior, but when you have the people behind you and you're pushing for their agenda, you're definitely making a difference. So keep us posted, and we'll look forward to getting an update from you soon.
Thank you very much. I sure will.
God bless you. And coming up next, tax and spend Democrats ram nearly $5 trillion.
The budget at this moment. While Afghanistan was falling, while Americans are stuck there, while young Afghans were falling, clinging to our airplanes, this is what they were focused upon. This is what they had President Biden calling twisting arms. And at the end of the day, we found there was not one Democrat to stand up. And it wasn't 3.5 they voted for, it's nearly $5 trillion they just voted for this week. So there is no longer a centrist Democrat. There's no longer a moderate Democrat. Every single Democrat voted for this. This has turned to a big government socialist party.
Congress capitulates on Biden's massive budget boondoggle without a single GOP vote. In a 200 to 212 party line vote, congressional Democrats rammed through a $3.5 trillion budget resolution while advancing the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill.
To win the future, we need to take the next step. Today, the House of Representatives did just that. Today's vote in the House allowed them to consider my Build Back Better agenda, a broad framework to make housing more affordable, bring down the cost of prescription drugs by giving Medicare the power to negotiate lower prices for drugs, make elder care more affordable, provide 2 years of free universal high-quality pre-K and 2 years of free community college, provide clean energy tax credits, continue to give the middle-class families the well-deserved tax cut for daycare and health care that they deserve, allowing a lot of women to get back to work primarily, and provide significant monthly tax cuts for working families with children through the child care tax credit.
It's a Democrat pipe dream, funding all of their liberal pet projects at the expense of American taxpayers, who are now potentially on the hook for an additional $5 trillion on top of the already massive federal debt.
Now that they combined both of them together, you're not voting just now for $1.2 trillion. And remember what they promised us, that it would be paid for. It's not paid for. They promised us that it would be about infrastructure. It's not just about infrastructure. And now it's tied to, if you vote for the $1.2 trillion, you're voting for nearly $5 trillion. That is what the deal that the Democrats have just cut inside Congress.
Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the mastermind behind this enormous spending scheme, says House committees are now working with the Senate on the particulars.
The President and the Senate sent us a legislation about a budget resolution for $3.5 trillion. Within it are some of the things I talked about before that relate to workforce development, building back better with women in the workplace, addressing the climate crisis in a way that was not addressed at all in the infrastructure bill. Very minor, just electrification and just other. Electrification is important, but it is not the totality of what we have to do, and we may want to do more. Our goal is by September 15th that we will have every committee reporting. Now, what was important about yesterday is we could do all of that. We could mark up bills, but we could not report to the Rules Committee, to the Budget Committee without passing a budget bill.
So here we are, one giant step closer to the edge of the fiscal abyss, as the tax and spend Democrats conspire to spend even more of our money. Joining me now, Representative for Florida's 17th Congressional District, Congressman Greg Steube. Congressman, when you look at this, the Democrats, those moderates, they acted like they weren't going to vote for it. Of course they voted for it. Democrats never go against Democrats.
Yeah, of course they voted for it. And I think what's interesting here that's kind of you read between the lines is what Leader McCarthy said was right. You combine them, we're talking $5 trillion. But what if you listen closely to what Speaker Pelosi said, they don't even know what they're spending the money on yet. It's just a framework in place that they're going to spend up to $1.5 trillion on infrastructure and 3.5 trillion on a spending bill. There's no details laid out. You heard her say they're going to send it to the budget committees, let the budget committees flush it out, and they're going to vote September 15th. So you don't even know what's in a $5 trillion bill that was just a framework that every single Democrat on that floor voted for. It's just astronomical when you compare that with in the last 18 months as a government, we have spent $11 trillion. Add on $5 more trillion. That's $16 trillion when we only take in $3.5 trillion a year to the entire revenue of our entire country. Those are the numbers that we're talking about. When I first got elected to Congress, the deficit was $21 trillion. It's already $30 trillion. If we pass this bill in September, it'll be almost $35 trillion just in 3 years that I've been in Congress. It's just astronomical.
The fact that the Democrats keep writing these blank checks with our money, none of us authorized this. Of course, we didn't in the last election either. We know who we voted for. But when you look at this, now that these committees are actually drafting this, they're just going to spend the money around to their own special interests. This isn't really going to ever reach the American people.
No, it'll be Green New Deal. It'll be amnesty to illegals. They're going to shove so many policy issues in these bills. Biden's own budget proposal did away with the Hyde Amendment. So this is also going to fund abortions legally, despite the fact that for 40 years that hasn't happened in our country. It's going to have so much social welfare, social programs, progressive wish list issues that I don't see how they get it passed in the Senate. Senator Sinema's already said that she's not voting for $3.5 trillion. And if you lop it with a $1.5 trillion infrastructure package, you're talking $5 trillion and all the things that are going to be in it. There's no way that they get that through the Senate. They're going to be forced to do it through reconciliation, but I don't even know if they have the votes for that. All while Afghanistan is crumbling, we have an invasion on our southern border, and all the issues that we should be focused on as a country, not passing voter rights, IDs, and trillions of dollars more in spending.
Well, you would hope it wouldn't get through the Senate, but look at all the Republican senators that defected and said, sure, let's just spend all this money when they knew this was the Democrats' ultimate plan. Nancy Pelosi said her ultimate plan was to pass this extra several $1 trillion with the infrastructure bill. So they knew that. The Republicans knew it. Whereas under President Trump, we wanted good infrastructure. It would have been targeted spending. With the Democrats, they don't know targeted spending. They just know overspending.
Well, and that's an interesting point. For 4 years, Trump wanted to do an infrastructure deal, yet Speaker Pelosi stood in his way. He wanted to do it. She wouldn't let him get it done. So, of course, there are things that Republicans can agree on. Roads and bridges, infrastructure, water infrastructure, actual real infrastructure. Those are things that a lot of Republicans support. Not $5 trillion sending spree when you don't even know exactly what's going to be in the framework of these bills. All the while, we have a crisis in Afghanistan. We have Americans stranded, and they want to bring all of Congress back to vote on a spending bill that we don't even know the details of.
It's so unbelievable, but yet it is believable because the Democrats, we knew socialism was their ultimate goal. We knew if they got these blank checks, they would just keep writing them and do it against our future. Instead of spending money to close the border, instead of spending money on the things that actually matter. What do you think is going to happen in the Senate going forward? Because the Republicans, they were such a good resistance against President Trump. Even when he, like we said, did infrastructure, Mitch McConnell said $1 trillion was too much. They think $1 trillion is fine now. Do you think they're going to compromise on this bill?
Well, based on what Senator Sinema has said, she's not going to vote for that. You lop them together, I think you probably lose Manchin too. Those Republicans that voted for the infrastructure package, if you put them together, they're not going to vote for a big spending bill like that. You're not going to have a single Republican senator vote for it. So even if they tried to do reconciliation by putting these two pieces together, I don't think they have the votes to do it. And if they change one paragraph, one period, one comma, it has to come back to the House for another vote. The government will shut down at the end of September if there's not at least a continuing resolution to fund the budget. So by October 1st, if they haven't passed a budget bill or a continuing resolution to fund the budget, the government's going to shut down, and they control the House, the Senate, and the White House.
And they're trying to shut the country down right now. When you look at what they're doing, it's so sad to see. Congressman, thank you for your work out there, being as effective resistance as we can right now. And keep us posted, because we're all going to be watching this. If you don't succeed, cheat again. And that's exactly what Democrats are trying to do. Playing the same game, but with a new bag of tricks. Since H.R. 1 failed to pass, why not try to ram through H.R. 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act? Because nothing could better fit their propaganda campaign than to link their mail-in ballots movement to the civil rights movement, right? Especially to drive home the message that they're waging a war against Jim Crow 2.0. Just take a look at the ad Jerry Nadler's House Judiciary Committee released in anticipation of Tuesday's vote on this very bill. Republicans want Jim Crow 2.0. The Democrats want voting rights for all, including dead people, felons, the underage, and of course, those who want to vote twice, 3 times, or as many times as they want. No discrimination here, people, which is why the bill did pass the House yesterday, strictly along party lines, by a margin of 219 to 212. So what exactly is in the bill? Actually, quite a lot. You know, all the election integrity laws that states are passing, well, the Biden and Justice Department would have the authority to overturn them. And any new laws or rules that states might want to pass, they'd have to first pre-clear with the Biden and Justice Department. Of course, even if this happens and some citizen, or what if they're a non-citizen, doesn't like a new law, they could declare they're aggrieved and sue. Think of all the frivolous lawsuits that could tie up states and counties in court. In addition, the Biden administration would be awarded veto power over everything from how states redistrict, select polling sites, which of course we'll see fewer of with mail-in ballots becoming the new rage, and so much more. No wonder the Democrats want it so bad. Joining us now with more on this, national spokesperson for the Republican National Committee, Paris Denard. Paris, how much is H.R. 4 really about Joe Manchin than anything else?
This issue of H.R. 4 is one that is of great concern to the RNC because it reinforces our passion or reinforces our conviction for supporting things like election integrity. This effort by the Democrats and the Biden administration to weaponize the Department of Justice to go after our election laws that are on a local level is shameful. We've got to stand firm, and I think everyone who watches your program understands this, but let's just reiterate it. We cannot allow H.R. 4 to become the law of the land, because what this will do is weaponize every aspect of local elections, so that when you want to have your state and local officials make reasonable, common sense laws to protect the vote, to make it easier to vote but harder to cheat, they will come in and say, not so much. That does not align with what we believe should be a woke system of elections. So I believe that we've got to stand together, unite around common sense principles like election integrity, and prevent things like H.R. 4 from becoming the law.
Well, and the Democrats, they really are so smart to link this to a personality like John Lewis. Then you're saying you're voting against John Lewis. You're voting against the civil rights movement. This is going to poll better in terms of just optics. Do you think that's why they're now putting all their effort in this, especially since Manchin said that he was more open to this one?
It's sinister, Natalie. That's exactly what this is. It's sinister. It's shameful that they would try to link the legacy of John Lewis to something like this based on a lie. They're lying to the American people. They're lying to Black Americans out there, trying to persuade us to believe that somehow the way that our voting laws are set up right now, they're discriminatory. They're not. Discriminatory laws are already illegal and under the Voting Rights Act. And also, the recent Supreme Court decision that came out in Arizona, the Supreme Court ruled that things like ballot harvesting was okay to be banned, to be eliminated, and that it was not discriminatory towards any minority group to have to vote in your precinct. Let's be very clear. They failed, meaning the Democrats failed to show one example of any discriminatory practice or any Black person or minority that was discriminated against because of the elimination of ballot harvesting and making people vote in their precinct, because it did not exist. And that's what's happening today. More and more Black people are voting. Long lines are happening because there's increased Black voter turnout, which is a good thing. And I believe a lot of these Black Americans who are voting Republican, because the trend lines are showing that more and more black Americans are voting for the Republican Party, and that is a threat to the Democrats. That is a threat to 2020. That's a threat to 2024, and that is part of what this is about.
You're so right. When you look at minority turnout in the last election, President Trump really grew this movement to include everyone. And that's what the Democrats really are afraid of, is the fact that the Republican Party is the party of Lincoln, and we are the party now of the people. It's the Democrats who are actually for the lobbyists and big business and big tech and all of that. What is the Republican Party specifically doing to push back on this? Because, of course, we can't do much with the House. But on the Senate side, of course, we know the Democrats will probably get rid of the filibuster.
We are calling on every American to make sure that they hold the line and call their members of Congress, call the senators, and tell them that they should reject H.R. 4. We are engaged in election integrity efforts across the country, especially with the 19 court cases that we are currently involved in, because we take this issue very seriously. But on this issue right now, we are making sure that the American people know and understand that this cannot be the law of the land. So we've got to make sure people are activated, mobilized against H.R. 4, because it's not right, and the Democrats are lying about what's in that bill.
Real quick, on those court cases, are those specifically regarding the last election, or is this in terms of the next election, trying to make sure that the laws are upheld?
These are post-2020 election cases to make sure that the shenanigans that happened in the last election will never happen again, and that the American people all across the country have confidence that this elections that are coming up are going to be ones that they can know that their vote does matter, it counts, and it will be secure. We've got to keep the attention and the pressure on this, because it's a very important issue.
Exactly. When we talk about H.R. 1, H.R. 4, what really matters is 2020 and trying to make sure, because they did that without H.R. 1 or H.R. 4. Of course, it would make it easier for them, but we have to fix what went wrong in the last election first. Paris, always great to see you, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon and getting an update on those cases.
Thanks so much.
And coming up next.